Hello, and welcome to the Bury Me Alive podcast.
I'm your host, Technicality.
And I'm your host, Ghostly. How are you doing today, Cal?
I'm a bit sick, but I should be good.
Everybody, please leave some love for Cal in this very trying time of illness.
I know, so horrible.
So horrible.
The head cold's gonna kill me. This is my last episode. Goodbye, my friends.
The last episode of Bury Me Alive due to Cal dying of a head cold. I hate that it has to end this way. Speaking of death,
No.
Cal, are you familiar with the poet Edgar Allan Poe?
Semi, yeah.
Have you read any of his little stories?
I have read The Clockwork Heart, I'm pretty sure. Is that what it's called? Something with a heart.
It's called The Telltale Heart, I believe is the story you're thinking of.
Okay, a little bit different, but I can remember things. Mm-hmm.
The Clockwork Heart. I love The Clockwork Heart. It's my absolute favorite story.
We're gonna blame it on me being sick, and we're just not gonna talk about that.
Totally. Well, Edgar Allan Poe was a famous poet. He lived in the 1800s, and if you're someone who has gone to school, you have likely read one of Edgar Allan Poe's stories. He is insanely famous, and he wrote dark stories and poets. Especially for the time period, his work was very shocking to many people, but they were like, okay, cool, let's keep doing this. His most famous story is a story called The Raven. Are you familiar with it, Cal?
Semi-familiar. I've read it before, but I don't remember the whole thing.
All right. Just to get an idea for those who are not familiar with Edgar Allan Poe and for you, this is the opening excerpt of his story, The Raven, and it goes like this. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, only this and nothing more. Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books secrets of sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here for evermore.
That is a poem.
It is a very long poem, and I highly recommend going and reading it because it's actually very, very good. But in summary, it's the story of this man, who we presume is Edgar, sitting in his bedchamber, and he hears a knocking, and he's, like, trying to comfort himself. He's clearly not too well, and the knocking is actually a raven, and the raven comes in, and he starts talking to this raven, and it's talking back to him, and he's clearly going mad. And the raven's response to every single question that he asks is just nevermore. So nevermore, quoth the raven, is a very popular quote. And that is from Poe.
Having a raven say the same thing over and over again, you would think the guy would just give up talking to the raven.
Yeah. I will say, our podcast has an interesting amount of correlations that can be traced back to Edgar Allan Poe. I'm a huge fan of his work. I don't think you know much of his work besides the one that you had to read for school. But
Not really, yeah.
yeah, his story, The Telltale Heart, is about him, in very broad strokes, murdering someone and burying them under the floorboards, but they didn't really kill him, so he can hear their heartbeat from under the floorboards, and it haunts him.
That's
So he
not
buried a
fun.
man alive on accident? And our show is called Bury Me Alive? There's also the fact that Technicality's little character is represented by a raven, and his most popular story is called The Raven.
So we're definitely not sponsored by the ghost of Edgar Allan Poe. Definitely not. You heard nothing.
We are not sponsored by Edgar Allan Poe. However, I do want to give a quick shout out to the Smithsonian Magazine for this episode because I found so much good information from them. They're a great source. So if you want to look more into Edgar Allan Poe and what we're talking about today, check them out. But we're not here to talk about the life of Edgar Allan Poe. What are we here to talk about?
The death.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, so Edgar Allan Poe's death is an unsolved mystery. We still don't know how it happened, what happened, the details leading up to it. So we are going to be covering the information and the theories relating to Edgar Allan Poe's death, which is something that sounds like it would be in one of his stories, which is kind of crazy. Alright, are you ready, Cal?
Yep.
Alright, let's get into it. Our story begins on October 3rd, 1849. It does not begin with Poe. It actually begins with a man called Joseph W. Walker. He worked for the Baltimore Sun, and he was outside of a public house on Election Day. Keep in mind, 1800s, 19th century, voting worked a little differently. Keep in mind that it was Election Day for the story. He saw a man sitting in a gutter, and he was clearly unwell. He was delirious. He was in dirty and ripped clothes that did not fit him properly, and he was semi-unconscious, and he clearly couldn't move. And as Walker approached the man, he found that it was Edgar Allan Poe himself, lying in a gutter.
Just imagine finding a random
I
famous
know.
author in a gutter. Like, you just walk up.
Especially,
and
like,
see
outside of
someone.
a public house. It's like, hi, I'm a big
Hi.
fan of your work. I see that you're having a rough night, but I'm a big fan.
Can I get your autograph?
Please don't ask people for their autographs when they're in this condition, because he's clearly unwell. Thankfully, Joseph W. Walker did not have the reaction of asking for an autograph. He was immediately concerned for Poe's health and well-being. So, he asked him if he had anyone in Baltimore City, where this was, who might know or be able to help him. He gave the name of Joseph E. Snodgrass. So, Walker wrote Snodgrass a letter. And this is the direct letter I have here. Baltimore City, October 3rd, 1849. Dear Sir, there is a gentleman rather the worse for wear at Ryan's Fourth Ward Polls. He goes under the cognomen of Edgar A. Poe, and who appears in great distress. He says he's in acquaintance with you. He is in need of immediate assistance. Yours in haste, Joss W. Walker. To Dr. J. E. Snodgrass.
Wait, was Edgar Allan Poe...
They use fancy words. I don't know why.
Was Edgar Allan Poe his real name, or was it just a nom de plume? Or pen name?
And Edgar Allan Poe, as far as I am aware, is his real name. It is what is on his tomb and stuff. So I don't know why he said the cognomen Edgar A. Poe. There's a lot of weird things about this letter. So, what came before leading to Poe being found literally in the gutter? Like, where did this event come from? A week earlier, Poe had left Richmond, Virginia, and he was going to Philadelphia to edit a collection of poems for a new author. When Walker found Poe outside of the polling place in the public house, it was the first anyone had heard or seen of the poet since his departure from Richmond. So it had been almost a week since anyone had heard from or seen Poe.
That's concerning. You don't just disappear for a week.
The whole thing is quite concerning. Yeah. Especially because it is recorded that Edgar was not too sound in the mind. Especially for the time period, it's quite shocking he was not lobotomized.
That just sounds... yeah.
Yeah. Poe, clearly, had never made it to Philadelphia. So he somehow was leaving Virginia, ended up in Baltimore, when he was planning to go to Philadelphia. Look at a map of the U.S. It doesn't really make sense.
How far away is that?
The most realistic path for this time period, it does not make sense for him to end up in Baltimore when he was trying to go to Philly. It doesn't add up.
But what's the mile distance away?
I don't know. I'm really bad at directions and movement in time. But it doesn't make sense. That's all we need to know. It doesn't make sense.
That's all you need to know.
That's all we need to know. He was also...
Don't ask questions.
We don't ask questions here. We just give facts. Which is very much not true if you've listened to any other episodes of ours.
Don't trust random people on the internet. It's not a great idea.
Nope. However, Edgar was living in New York at the time. And so he also never made it back to New York. Or Richmond, where he was staying with his aunt. He was staying with his aunt in Richmond, never made it back to Richmond. He was living in New York at the time, he never made it back to New York. He was trying to go to Philadelphia, he never made it to Philadelphia. Baltimore, what the heck?
He's just really bad at directions. He was fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Poe died on October 7th, 4 days after he was found outside the public house. He had never gained enough consciousness or got through enough delirium to explain how he had been found. And it was very confusing to everyone involved. He spent his last days between fits of delirium and visual hallucinations. So he was hallucinating, he was delirious, he was barely conscious. Was not a fun time. The night before his death, according to the physician tending to him, whose name was John J. Moran, Poe was calling out for someone by the name of Reynolds. And we don't know who Reynolds was. It is not recorded that he knew anyone by the name of Reynolds, but he just kept calling out to Reynolds. Who's Reynolds? Who's Reynolds?
Do you think it was a possibility that he met a Reynolds on his week-long travel?
Yes, it is linked to one of the theories I have. So we'll be getting into a little more about Reynolds in a minute here. After he died, he was buried in an unmarked grave in a Baltimore graveyard and was not moved and put in a marked grave for 26 years. He was just left in a Baltimore graveyard. He was buried, but none of his loved ones were there. It was just him, dead, unmarked, in a graveyard for 26 years.
Two questions. One, how did they know it was his if it was unmarked? And two, why didn't his family come finding him sooner? If, someone he knew got his letter, you think they would contact his family?
Yeah, so there was a wedding in the family at the time, so I guess people were more focused on going to the wedding than his burial. Also, he did not have the strongest relationship with his family. And also keep in mind the time period, travel, a lot more
Fair
complicated.
enough.
But yeah, it is still quite odd. I don't know how they knew it was his grave, but just keep in mind he was buried there in Baltimore, because it links into one of the theories of his death. So now we know the build-up. So, what caused this? What happened in that week he was missing? Why was he found in this state? He wasn't even wearing his own clothes. He didn't even have any of his bags. He was just there.
He just existed. He was having a good time.
He just existed. He was not having a good time. So, let's get into the theories. The first theory is that he was beaten.
Beated?
We're jumping right in. The theory was that on his travels, he was robbed and then beaten after getting drunk.
Wasn't he an alcoholic?
Yes. I links into another theory, so I'll get in a bit more later. But he was drunk, and he was also a lightweight. So he was an alcoholic who got drunk very easily, which is not a very good combination.
Yeah.
So, kind of disappointing. This explains his state of disarray and little consciousness. It also explains why he was not wearing his own clothes. However, does not explain why he was found in Baltimore, does not explain why he was outside of the public house, doesn't explain anything else.
Wait, why does it explain why he was not found in his own clothes?
Because if he was robbed...
Oh, if he was robbed, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and they took his clothes. Because, everyone wants a fancy Gothic poet's clothes.
It's the new style.
I want a fancy Gothic poet's clothes.
That's
I would wear them.
Just steal Edgar Allen Poe's clothes.
I did not kill Edgar Allan Poe, for the record.
Ghostly stole Edgar's clothes. Not clothes.
I traveled back to 1849 to steal Edgar Allan Poe's clothes because I was jealous. If I had a time machine, there's a lot of other things I would prioritize over stealing Edgar Allan Poe's clothes.
That's the one thing that doesn't change anything. You can't do anything to change anything. You just steal clothes. It's great.
And I kill him, apparently, as well.
Definitely.
Speaking of alcohol, I mentioned that he was an alcoholic and a lightweight. He struggled with alcohol for many, many years, and it was something that ran in his family. His sister was also very susceptible to alcohol and got drunk very easily, and so did his parents. So it is not unlikely that he got drunk and died of alcohol poisoning or overconsumption because, shocking, if you drink too much, it does affect your health.
Symptoms?
However, again, this leaves a bunch of things unexplained about how he was found.
Did symptoms when he was admitted to the hospital match those of alcohol poisoning?
It was the 1800s, and people did not keep record of their patients the way they do now. So I do not have a lot of information about that type of thing. However, he was not actually admitted to a hospital. He was kept at a house. It does not say whose house, but he was kept at a house in a spare room. Yes, so the person taking care of him was John J. Moran, who mainly did house calls as part of this. So he was likely staying with Snodgrass, the friend that he told Walker about, who was actually also a doctor, or he was staying at Walker's house. He was staying somewhere in Baltimore, though. Another theory, which links in to the day he was found on a voting day. The public house he was found outside of was a polling house, meaning people are casting votes there. There is a practice in the 19th century called cooping, which is a funny little word for it because it's actually a really horrible practice, but it's called cooping.
Sounds like coup. like cooing.
Yeah, but cooping.
It's
The
like
P.
how coo is spelled. It's the C-U-O-P.
Yeah.
That's how it's spelled, right? I'm not going in.
How is it? Wait, which word?
To kill an important political figure. Cooing. Coo.
This is very much related to our topic. Wait, how is it spelled?
Yeah, because it sounds... Oh, I was right.
Okay,
C-O-U-P.
yeah. No, cooping that I'm talking about is spelled Cooping. And it is a form of voting fraud.
Hey, we do not
Woo.
support that.
So how cooping works is that let's say I'm a little man, all right? Let's call me little Jimmy John for the sake of this argument, all right? I'm little Jimmy John and I'm walking down the street in a Cooper, which is the people who run this. So sorry to any Coopers out there. Not the people committing voting fraud, but like people with the name.
That's definitely where the name Cooper comes from. You're all just voting fraud.
I don't actually know. Anyway, so I'm little Jimmy John, I'm walking down the street, and then a Cooper comes up and says, "Hey kid, I'll give you money if you help me commit voting fraud or else." So they'll threaten them and offer them money if they do this. And little Jimmy John, I'm just like, "All right, let's do it." So what I'll do is I'll go into the voting house, I'll cast a vote, and then I'll leave. And then I will change my clothes and like put myself in a disguise, and then I'll go back in and vote again.
Why didn't the Coopers just change their clothes and vote themselves?
Because most of them are already criminals and wanted for other things. So voting's a little iffy. Also, if there's more people and they can change their clothes, if one of them gets caught, it doesn't shut down the whole operation.
Fair enough.
But when in this time period, because people were stupid, to put it plainly, when you would cast a vote, so if I'm little Jimmy John and I give them my vote, I put it in the little box, I would get a free drink. I would get free beer or some other kind of alcoholic drink.
I want a chocolate milk.
No, alcohol. Wait, was there chocolate milk in the 1800s?
Probably not. But wait, I think there actually might have been.
Alcohol.
Just really expensive
Yeah,
chocolate
but
milk.
in this time period for voting, you got alcohol. This would explain a lot of things. It would explain why Edgar was not found in his own clothing, because he was in the wrong clothes. It would explain why he was found outside of the public house, because he was voting. It would explain why he seemed drunk, because he kept getting more and more alcohol, and he was a lightweight. Also, Coopers were very violent. I mentioned that they would threaten people into participating in the voting fraud. So if they didn't do as they were told, the people being roped into this, they would beat them and attack them and hurt them and threaten them and harm them. So it would explain some of the damage done to Poe's person.
Don't you think they would recognize Edgar, or had his image not traveled? Because the person who found him recognized him, at least from what I've heard. But
yeah,
wouldn't the people seeing him go in with a disguise recognize him?
If they did, they probably just didn't care. Due to the fact that this theory explains almost everything about that night, it is the most widely accepted theory of Edgar's death. However, it's not the funnest theory. It's kind of rough.
Yeah, it is a bit.
So let's get into some funner theories, shall we?
Yay, fun death. It's like fun death,
Woohoo!
but death.
Oh my god. Okay. Off topic really quick. Who actually likes fun dip?
I do.
You do?
Yeah. It's horrible.
Technicality. You disgust me.
Okay, look, it tastes good. It's not good for you.
No,
but
it doesn't.
Doesn't stop it from making it taste good. I really like this.
It really does not taste good.
But it
Do you
does.
eat the stick?
Yeah. The stick's the
Why?
best part.
The stick is the worst part. My grandfather eats the stick, and I think it's vile.
No, it's the best part.
There's this amazing show called Shrinking, where it's about therapists, and Harrison Ford is in it, and he plays one of the therapists, and he gets introduced to Fun Dip, and he's like, it's great, you can even eat the stick. So there's this, like, Harrison Ford character that's obsessed with Fun Dip. That's the only person I am okay liking Fun Dip.
But it's Fun Dip. It's not my favorite candy, but I still like it.
And you still disappoint me for liking it. Back on topic. I don't even remember how we got to Fun Dip, but back to murder.
It's Fun Death.
Oh, Fun Death, Fun Dip. Oh, that's right. I have a horrible memory. Okay. Another theory. This one is a disregarded theory, meaning it has been proven to be out the window. And that is carbon monoxide poisoning, which was very common. Stick with me. It was very common in this time period due to the type of gas used for indoor lighting, which was coal gas, which had heavy metals in it, which can cause carbon monoxide poisoning. And it was theorized that he was exposed to the coal gas and got carbon monoxide poisoning. However, he was tested for this. His corpse was tested for this properly, which was in this form of testing actually worked. And it's what we still use today. And it was not found on his person. So,
Also, if it was carbon monoxide poisoning, you'd think the other people in the place were also gonna get sick from it.
yeah. However, like I mentioned, it was a very common form of death at the time. So it could be that he stayed somewhere over his travel period and he got it. Or he was just spending too much time inside and got it. This is why you leave the house, so you don't get carbon monoxide poisoning.
Go touch grass.
Go touch grass. We say, as people who have probably not touched grass in a week.
We ignored that part. We
Exactly.
ignored that I've stayed in my house.
Another theory that relates to the time period of Edgar's death is rabies.
Ooh, that's a fun one.
I know, I said that these were the funner ones. So rabies was very common at this time period because people were just like, why would we properly domesticate or treat our pets for illness? It's fine. We can spare it. And this would explain the delirium he was in, the hallucinations, the rough state, etc., etc. However, it does not explain why he was wearing someone else's clothes or any of the other stuff, but it does explain his delirium.
But you have the fact, if he was also drunk, don't
Yeah.
people who have rabies avoid water? Would
Yes.
that include beer?
Yes. This is not a very solid theory, but it's a theory.
He also had paranoia, so wouldn't it be with the guy trying to help him? Do you think
He was very paranoid in general. It is important to remember. I mentioned he was not too well in the head, and he was someone who was just a paranoid person, so it could have just been passed off as normal behavior. However, rabies is not a very solid theory.
Are there any other theories?
I have 2 more theories, and these are the longest ones, which is why I saved them for last, and you're going to love the last one. This next theory is not as fun, but it's interesting, and that is he died of a brain tumor.
Ooh, that's nasty.
So, as we know, he was buried in an unmarked grave, and when he was moved to a different cemetery 26 years later, there was a statue placed honoring Poe at the entrance, and they dug up his coffin. And in order to have him moved to a new place, they had to open the coffin and, like, check him out. And so he was, like, decayed, and there's very little left of him, because, you know,
Death.
he was decayed and it's been 26 years. And it had not been very kind to the coffin or his corpse. So a lot of him, gore warning really quick, was like falling apart. Like his skin, like chunks of it were just kind of around the coffin in disintegrating chunks. And it was not a pretty scene. It rarely is.
I feel bad for the workers.
Little remained of his body. However, it was found that there was a strange feature on his skull, which was a mass rolling around inside newspapers, and the clump was claimed to be Poe's brain.
Wait, what?
The wording doesn't really make sense here. In summary, a clump was found attached to his skull, and it was believed that it was Poe's brain.
That would be kind of weird that it would be attached to his skull.
However, yeah, it was weird. However, what's something that can attach to your skull can kill you and can survive that time of decay?
Brain tumor.
Yep. So it is theorized that it could have been a brain tumor due to the decay of the body. We were not able to test for this, and he was just buried again and probably left the rest of the people who had to dig him up traumatized again. But it is another theory that is proof, but also somewhat disregarded due to the fact that we can't properly test for it. It would explain the delirium and some of the hallucinations he had, but it does not explain most of what happened that night.
You also have the fact you think they'd notice if he had a lump on his head when they took care of him.
Keep in mind, brain tumors grow on the inside of your skull.
Yeah, but wouldn't it stop growing once he has died?
Yes.
So, it growing out of his head after he had died wouldn't make sense.
No. So, after he decomposed, it revealed that. Because his skin and his skull was exposed so they could see, and, it probably cracked and stuff, because that can happen as you decay, and they could see it inside.
Yeah, I was just misinterpreting.
It's alright. Once more, we pray for the sick technicality.
Yeah.
Now, we have the final theory that matches our podcast the most. What do you think the theory is, Cal?
A raven killed him.
No, that would be
With
very
a knife.
cool, but it is not. The theory is
He was buried alive?
murder.
Yay!
It's murder. I'm surprised you didn't guess that one.
I mean,
But
getting
yes.
buried alive is murder, so...
That's true, but this is a bit different. And again, alas, this is another theory that has been disregarded, and it is not very stable, but it is a theory, so we keep it in, because that's what we do. Also, it's fun and matches our podcast, because we are, in fact, a murder and cryptid podcast. The theory was began by John Evangelist Walsh, which is quite the name and very hard to say. The book came out in 2000, and it was a theory about Poe's death. It's a whole book, by the way, which is kind of crazy. And it was a theory that his death was a murder by the brothers of his wealthy fiancé.
I mean, wasn't his fiancé like a 13, 14-year-old?
Yeah. But she was still rich. She still had money. You can be 13, 14 and have money.
Brothers getting revenge for their poor little sister.
The brother's getting revenge on the pedophile. Anyway. So the theory is, this is what Walsh argues, and that is that Poe made it to Philadelphia, where he was ambushed by the brothers, which there was 3 of them, by the way, and they warned Poe against marrying their sister. So And Poe was frightened by this, so he disguised himself in new clothes, which accounts for the second-hand clothing according to Walsh, and he hid in Philadelphia for a week before heading back to Richmond to marry his fiancée. And the brothers stopped Poe while he was in Baltimore, beat him, and forced him to drink whiskey, which they knew would send Poe into a deathly sickness. That is Walsh's theory.
That's kind of intense. I mean, why didn't they just stab him or poison him? Seems a bit faster.
This theory has as many holes in it as Swiss cheese.
To be fair, they could have been trying to disguise his murder, but still, it feels
so they beat him and then forced him to drink whiskey to send him into a deathly sickness?
Yeah, that...
They probably knew he was easy to drunk, but...
He was very easy to drink.
He was very easy to drink. No, he was very easy to get drunk. But that doesn't make sense. Why would they beat him and then force him to drink whiskey? Mitski? Oh my god, I love Mitski. No, whiskey.
If he was weaker, his immune system might have been hindered. If he was...
In my opinion, I think the most effective way to go about it if they were trying to do this method would be forcing him to get really drunk and then beating him. Also, I wouldn't leave him outside of a public house where a bunch of people are running around voting.
You'd also have the fact that it'd be easier just to make him disappear on the road instead of going to another town and then killing him.
Yeah, why did they follow him all the way to Baltimore? Also, if he made it to Philadelphia, why didn't he go to the meeting he was supposed to? The whole reason he was in Philadelphia was for that meeting. It would also
be weird if they warned him and then went along and killed him later before he had even had a chance to cancel the wedding.
Yeah, because keep in mind, it takes a while for news to travel, breaking up with your soon-to-be wife.
Yeah, that just seems off.
Again, there's so many holes in this theory that could be, in fact, Swiss cheese. That is all the theories I have. Cal, what is your theory on how Edgar Allan Poe died? What do you think happened here?
I think a ghost and a raven went back in time and watched all of these things happen at once and made an episode on it later.
That's an interesting theory.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really interesting theory.
What about you? What's your theory?
Mine's not as fun. I'm a logic person. He was likely got wrapped up in a cooping situation and he had to pay the price.
Yeah, that's the one
Very
that makes
sad.
the most sense.
However, I do like the one where a ghost and a raven go back in time.
Yeah.
What are the ghost and the raven's names? Do they have names?
I'm assuming so. Wouldn't it be Ghostly? Or maybe Technicality?
I think that would be a good duo.
If you are ever an old goth poet, do not travel alone while drunk, or you will get mysteriously disappeared by your in-laws, and then recorded by a ghost and a raven.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Bury Me Alive podcast. As a reminder, I'm your host, Ghostly.
And I'm your host, Technicality.
Thank you so much for listening. Just listening to our show is huge support to us. We just do this for fun, and it means so much that you guys listen to our silly little Raven and Ghost show. If you did like this episode, go ahead and like it. If you're listening on Spotify, rate us. If you're listening on YouTube, like the video and leave a comment. And we just hope you're having a good day. We hope to see you again soon.
I just realized, isn't the thing a crow, not a raven?
Your little character? I don't know. You just told me to make you a little bird. So I did. All right. Thank you. I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.